I've been making jewelry for almost 7 years now, and there's this misconception that it's very expensive to get started. While it certainly can be, I'll show you the most cost effective way that you can start casting your own metal at home for about $200 to $300. The core of the skill set is the casting itself. While some casting methods are very expensive, like lost wax casting, which just the casting setup alone can run you over $1,000, there's an ancient technique that's still used today that's far more economical. It's called sand casting. The premise is simple. It's basically how it sounds. You press a mold into this sand-like substance called Delft clay, and then you pour metal into it. It's really that simple. Therefore, the first thing you'll need is a bag of Delft clay, and you'll need some sort of metal casting mold, which you hold the clay in. You can find these two items for around $60. The next thing you'll need is, of course, your metal. I can't really specify a price here because it entirely depends on what type of metal you want and how much of it. If you want to start creating jewelry, especially fine jewelry out of silver and gold, I'd personally recommend starting with bronze. Or actually, I'd recommend starting with bronze regardless of what you're trying to do. It's very cheap, it looks pretty, and it has a similar melting point to precious metals. So you'll actually kind of get a feel for how precious metals work. And it's a hell of a lot cheaper. No matter which metal you want, it's ideal to get grain, casting grain. This makes it far easier to melt and ensures it's relatively pure. You can get a whole pound of bronze casting grain for $15 to $20, which is insane. I work with precious metals, and even in silver, which is far cheaper than gold, if you were to buy a pound of that, it would run you well over $600, which is like, do some math. Fuck, I don't have my phone. 600 divided by 20, 6 divided by 230, 30 times more expensive. So yeah, you can see why it's better to start with bronze. And then of course you'll need a way to heat your metal. The cheapest way to do this is with a propane torch. Just know that it definitely takes patience. It can take like 5 to 10 minutes to melt your metal thoroughly. You can help speed up this process if you make a little makeshift box out of fire bricks and then heat your metal up in there, because it will retain a lot of heat that would otherwise dissipate, and that's why it takes so long for it to melt when you're just using a torch in open air. You can find a basic torch for under 20 bucks and a can of propane for probably under 10. For these specifically, I would check your local hardware store instead of online because these items tend to be cheaper there. A few fire bricks would probably run you about $15. Just know that you'll have to cut them and be a little bit handy in order to make a box. Otherwise, it still might be worth the investment even if you just stack them together and create a little walled area around where you heat your metal, because it'll still help retain some of that heat. And when you're melting with the propane torch, you really want any help you can get. So in total, you can get your entire heating method for about 30 to 40 bucks. If you're wondering what you hold your metal in while you melt it, you'll need a crucible and tongs. You can find both of these often in a set for under $20. Then you'll need a couple smaller things in order to ensure that your casting goes smoothly, because casting is one of those unpredictable things where you need the casting gods on your side for it to go smoothly. Expect it to be a bit of a learning curve, but it's well worth it. Casting metal is awesome. I mean, you can just make solid metal things. Like, how cool is that? You'll need a chemical compound called borax, or maybe it's just one chemical. You need borax. A sprinkle of this in your crucible while you're heating your metal will help to purify it, and as a result, give you smoother casts with less imperfections on their surface. You can grab a bag on Amazon for about $7. Then lastly, for casting, you'll of course need your safety gear. Stimping on this is tempting, I know, but incredibly irresponsible because you're essentially working with lava. I mean, like, if you drop molten metal on your skin, it will literally like fuse with it. It doesn't just fall off. The injuries from this stuff are severe. I mean, don't let that scare you away, but if you just have basic safety equipment, then you're not going to have an issue. So if you don't have a metal surface to work on in general, like a metal table, you can put everything in an oven pan if it's able to sit securely on your surface. Then you'll need blacksmith gloves and safety glasses. You can get gloves and safety glasses for $20 to $30. And ideally, you'll want a fire-resistant apron too. This will protect your whole body in case you drop anything. You're not going to have a problem. I really flirted with this danger one time. I was soldering something together. My dumbass bumped the surface and a little piece of molten metal like flew down onto my pants. Luckily, it was so small that it didn't burn through my pants, but it fused with them, and that will happen to your skin. And if it were any bigger, it would have for sure just went through my pants and like burned and fused with my skin. Fuck that take your safety seriously. Lastly, for safety gear, it's smart to keep a fire extinguisher around in case of an emergency. You can grab one of the smaller sized ones for about 25 bucks, which is far less than fire damage will cause you. I lied. There's one more thing that's extremely important as well, and that's a dust mask. Metallic dust is some of the worst you can inhale because it's metal, it's sharp, and it does a ton of damage to your lungs. So definitely get a good respirator. You can grab a 3M mask and its official particulate filters for about 35 bucks. I would go name brand on this one so you ensure that it's actually up to standard and actually protecting you from your environment. All right, so that takes care of the bulk of the process and the bulk of supplies that you'll need. But of course, after you cast your metal, you'll need some way to finish it. So the first thing you'll need in terms of finishing is a jeweler's saw. Even if you don't make jewelry, you still need a jeweler's saw. It's essentially like a fine metal saw that's able to cut metal pretty easily. When you cast something, you'll have a sprue attached to it. This is essentially the path that the molten metal takes to get to the cast and what's left over, like what fills that path. You can pick up a cheap jeweler's saw for about 15 bucks. Now, for the actual finishing, you can get by with files and sandpaper, which will certainly be the cheapest route, but I highly recommend a rotary tool. I can't overstate how insanely useful a rotary tool will be, no matter what kind of metalworking you're doing. It's essentially like a Swiss Army knife, and you can put not various, you can put like infinite different attachments into it. And so you basically have this one tool that can do your rough sanding, your carving, polishing, so much in just one tool. It's such a good thing to have. And they're not that expensive. I have a Fordham now. This thing is awesome. But, it was like $300-$400. I mean, this is an industry professional tool, so it makes sense. But for the longest time, I just had a Dremel. It was kind of a nice Dremel. It was like $90, I think, but it was the Dremel 3000. Came with a box, a ton of accessories, and a flex shaft, which was this bendy thing that's attached to this. It makes it much more maneuverable. But if you want to save money, you can just get a Dremel itself, but you'll have to hold the motor in your hand. And the thing is the motor is a lot bigger than the handpiece. And so you won't have the same control you would if you have a flex shaft with a little handpiece. Certainly still possible though, especially when you're first starting out. You're not really going to have any techniques that allow you to get super detailed anyways. So you can definitely get by with just a $30-$40 Dremel. But yeah, that's about everything you need. And you don't need to spend money on education either, which would have been the largest expense out of all of this. Thanks to the internet, you have access to pretty much limitless resources on whatever you need to learn. YouTube alone has plenty of good information. I would recommend a YouTube channel called Andrew Barry. He's the GOAT of jewelry YouTubers. Like, he has such a vast library of knowledge around all things jewelry making. Soldering is a super tough skill, like maybe the hardest thing that you have to learn in jewelry making, at least in terms of basic skills. And he has some pretty good videos on that. So definitely check out Andrew Barry. Probably plenty of other good people too. So as you can see, you can have your own basic metalworking setup for relatively cheap. Sure, it's $200 to $300, but you're going to be able to do so much with this. And if you make the jump up to silver or especially gold, you can recoup your money so fast because of just the expensive nature of those materials. Of course, with such a basic casting method, you'll be somewhat limited in terms of the kinds of things you can create until you're able to upgrade to more equipment. But even so, with sand casting, you're still able to do so much with it. Like, really, it's such a cool skill to have. You're going to be able to make so many different things out of metal too, which is like, I feel like untouchable for a lot of people, or at least perceived that way. Like, you're not making something out of wood, you're not making something out of plastic. It's like metal, you know what I mean? Solid ass metal. It just has a cool factor that other materials don't have. And you'll be able to do it, and from right at home too. So I hope this helps. And if you're starting a new journey, I wish you the best of luck. Thanks for watching.